Sometimes love finds us in the most unexpected places, between the most unlikely people. This is a story about Marcus, a competitive bodybuilder whose life revolved around protein shakes and deadlifts, and Owen, a gentle bookstore owner who lived for poetry and first editions. When Marcus walked into that little bookstore on Maple Street one rainy Tuesday afternoon, neither man could have imagined how completely their worlds would change. This is their story, a reminder that opposites don't just attract, they complete each other. If you believe in love that breaks all expectations, hit that subscribe button and let's begin this beautiful journey together. Marcus Rodriguez had won 3 regional bodybuilding championships by the time he was 32. His Instagram following had climbed past 200,000, and his supplement sponsorships paid better than most corporate jobs. Every morning started at 5. Every meal was weighed and logged, and every muscle group had its dedicated day. His life was discipline, routine, and the relentless pursuit of physical perfection. Friends often joked that Marcus's calendar was more rigid than a military operation. Meal prep on Sundays, leg day on Mondays, client training sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays, posing practice on Fridays. There was comfort in that predictability, safety in knowing exactly what each day would bring. But on that particular Tuesday, something unusual happened. It rained, not just a drizzle, but one of those sudden autumn downpours that turn city streets into rivers and send everyone scrambling for shelter. Marcus had been mid-run 3 miles from his apartment when the sky opened up. He ducked under the nearest awning, which happened to belong to a bookstore he had passed 1,000 times, but never entered. The sign above the door read Owen's Books in elegant hand-painted letters that looked like they belonged to another century. Through the rain-streaked window, he could see warm light and rows upon rows of books. Inside, the smell hit him first. Old paper, leather, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Maybe cinnamon, maybe vanilla, maybe just the scent of stories waiting to be discovered. The shelves, stretched from floor to ceiling, packed so tightly with books that he wondered how anyone found anything. Classical music played softly from somewhere in the back, something slow and melodic that Marcus didn't recognize. Warm Edison bulbs cast everything in a golden glow that felt like stepping into a memory. Or perhaps into a painting of how bookstores existed in some gentler, slower era. "We don't get many people running in here," a voice said, gentle amusement coloring the words. At least not literally running. Marcus turned to find a man about his age, watching him from behind the counter. He was slender, almost delicate compared to Marcus's bulk, wearing a cardigan the color of autumn leaves that had seen better days, with wire-rimmed glasses perched on a nose that was slightly crooked, like it had been broken once and healed at an interesting angle. His hair was dark and perpetually messy, in a way that looked both accidental and perfect, like he'd run his fingers through it while reading something particularly engaging. When he smiled, fine lines crinkled around his eyes, and there was something in that smile that made Marcus's heart do an unexpected little skip. "The rain," Marcus explained, suddenly aware of how much water he was dripping onto the hardwood floor. "I'm sorry, I'm making a mess. I can wait outside if water dries," the man said, already coming around the counter with a towel. Not a paper towel, but an actual cloth towel, forest green and soft from many washings. "Here, I'm Owen, by the way. This is my place, Marcus." He accepted the towel, acutely aware of how large his hands looked, how much space his body took up in this delicate environment. A shelf of poetry books stood directly to his right, and he was genuinely afraid that if he turned too quickly, he might knock the entire thing over. "Thanks. I'll just wait until it lets up." "Take your time," Owen said, returning to his stool behind the counter where a massive book lay open, its pages dense with text and its cover worn smooth with age. "Rain like this usually passes in 20 minutes or so. Feel free to look around if you'd like. Though I should warn you, the organization system is somewhat unconventional." "Unconventional how?" Marcus asked, curious despite himself. Owen's smile turned slightly sheepish. "It makes sense to me. That's the important part, right? Fiction is alphabetical by author. but sometimes I group books by theme if they seem like they belong together. Nonfiction is more of an adventure. My uncle started the system and I've just continued it. Regular customers say it adds to the charm. New customers sometimes look panicked. There was something endearing about the way he said it, like he knew it was impractical, but loved it anyway. Marcus had never understood impractical. His entire life was built on efficiency and optimization. But standing there, dripping in the golden light of this chaotic, beautiful bookstore, impractical suddenly seemed appealing. Marcus had no intention of looking around. Books weren't his thing, they never had been. In high school, he'd struggled through assigned reading, preferring the straightforward logic of the gym to the confusing emotions of literature. While other kids debated the symbolism in The Great Gatsby, Marcus had been in the weight room, finding peace in the simple equation of effort plus consistency equals results. But standing there, dripping and awkward, he felt obligated to at least pretend interest. He moved toward the nearest shelf and pulled out a book at random. "A son, Neruda," Owen said without looking up from his own reading. "Good choice." Marcus glanced at the cover. 20 love poems and a song of despair. He'd never heard of it. Had no idea who Neruda was or why anyone would write poems about despair. Poetry, he said, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. Now Owen did look up, and his expression was thoughtful, not offended. Behind his glasses, his eyes were a warm brown that reminded Marcus of coffee or maybe honey in sunlight. "Not a poetry fan?" "I don't really read much," Marcus admitted, feeling strangely vulnerable in that admission. "When I do, it's usually about nutrition or training programs. Protein synthesis, muscle recovery, competition prep. Pretty boring stuff." "I doubt that," Owen said, surprising him. He set down whatever he was using as a bookmark. It looked like an old receipt, and gave Marcus his full attention. "Everything's interesting if you care about it. The mechanics of the human body, what it can do, what it needs, that's its own kind of poetry, isn't it? Understanding the systems, the discipline required, the transformation possible when you commit to something completely." Something in Marcus's chest shifted slightly, like a door opening in a room he hadn't known existed. No one had ever compared his passion to poetry before. Most people saw bodybuilding as vanity, as narcissism wrapped in protein powder and spray tan. His own father had asked more than once when Marcus was going to get a real job. Even his friends from high school, the ones he'd lost touch with, had treated his competitions like a strange hobby rather than the calling he felt it to be. "You really think so?" he asked, and was surprised by how much the answer mattered. "Absolutely," Owen said, and his sincerity was unmistakable. Dedication to any craft is beautiful. It's all about understanding a complex system and working with it, whether that system is your body or a sonnet. Both require patience, attention, and respect for the process. Marcus found himself moving closer to the counter, the Neruda book still in his hand. Outside, the rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, but inside felt separate from the rest of the world, like they existed in a bubble where time moved differently. "What are you reading?" Owen glanced down at his book with the fond expression people usually reserved for old friends or beloved pets. "Middlemarch, George Eliot. I try to reread it every few years. It's like visiting home. You notice different things each time, see rooms you missed before, understand things your younger self couldn't grasp." "What's it about?" "Life," Owen said simply, then laughed at himself. "Sorry, that's not very helpful, is it? It's about people in a small English town in the 1830s, about their dreams and marriages and ambitions, about how we're all connected in ways we don't always see, and how our choices ripple outward, about idealism and disappointment and hope. George Eliot understood human nature better than almost any writer who ever lived. She had this way of seeing into people's hearts and describing what she found there with such compassion, such generosity. The rain continued to pour outside, and Marcus realized he didn't mind. He pulled up a wooden chair, testing it first to make sure it would hold his 240 pounds of muscle, and sat down. "Tell me more." Owen's face lit up in a way that transformed him entirely, and he began to talk. He talked about Dorothea Brooke and her idealism, how she married the wrong man for the right reasons. He talked about Tertius Lydgate and his dreams of medical reform and how pride and debt destroyed him. He talked about the ways people misunderstand each other, the ways love can be both salvation and trap, the ways we're all stumbling through life hoping to matter, hoping to be good, hoping to be loved. Marcus listened, watching the way Owen's hands moved when he got excited. The way he'd occasionally laugh at his own enthusiasm and push his glasses up his nose. The way his whole body seemed to lean forward when he talked about something he cared about. When the rain finally stopped, Marcus didn't notice for another 10 minutes. It was Owen who glanced at the window and said, "Oh, looks like it's cleared up." "Oh," Marcus said, glancing out at the wet but clearing street. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, painting everything in that peculiar golden-grey light that comes after storms. "I should go. I've probably kept you from your work." "Not at all," Owen said, and he sounded like he meant it. "This was the best part of my day. It was nice meeting you, Marcus." Marcus stood, then looked down at the Neruda book still in his hand. On impulse, surprising himself, he said, "I'll take this." Owen's surprise was evident, but he smiled as he stood and came around to the register. "Really?" "You made me curious," Marcus admitted, "about poetry and stuff." The price was $8. Marcus pulled out his wallet, but Owen waved him off. "First books free for new customers," he said. "House rule." "You sure? That doesn't seem like a great business model." Owen laughed, a sound that was warm and genuine and made Marcus want to hear it again. "The bookstore isn't really about making money. If it was, I'd have closed years ago. It's about getting books into people's hands, starting conversations, building community. My uncle always said a bookstore is just a library where you're allowed to take things home." "Your uncle sounds like he was a good person," Marcus said. "The best," Owen agreed, and something sad and sweet crossed his face. "He died 5 years ago, left me this place. Some days it feels like a gift, other days like a responsibility I'm not sure I'm worthy of. But I try." "I think you're doing great," Marcus said, and meant it. "This place is special, I can feel it." Their eyes met, and Marcus felt that strange skip in his heartbeat again. Owen smiled, soft and a little shy, and said, "I'll expect a full report next time you're in. On the poems, next time." The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility and promise. Marcus left the bookstore with the slim volume tucked into his jacket pocket, and that night, instead of his usual meal prep and evening training session, he sat on his couch and opened it. The poems were in Spanish, with English translations on the facing pages. He read slowly, struggling with some of the language and metaphors, but certain phrases jumped out at him like they'd been written in light. "I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees." What did that even mean? And why did it make his heart beat faster, his breath catch in his throat like he'd just finished a hard set of squats? He went back to the bookstore 3 days later, telling himself it was just to discuss the book, that it was normal to want intellectual conversation, that the flutter in his stomach when he pushed open the door was just because he'd had too much coffee. Owen was shelving books on a ladder when the bell above the door chimed, and when he turned and saw Marcus, his whole face brightened in a way that made Marcus feel like he'd won something more important than any trophy. "You came back." "I finished the book," Marcus said, feeling strangely nervous. His hands felt too big, like he didn't know what to do with them. "I wanted to talk about it if you have time." "I always have time for book discussions," Owen said, climbing down the ladder with careful movements. "Let me make us some tea." And so it began. Marcus started coming by twice a week, then 3 times, then almost daily. His training partners noticed, commenting that Marcus was distracted, that he kept checking his phone, that he'd started leaving the gym earlier than usual. His nutritionist noticed when Marcus started asking if he could occasionally have a scone with his tea without destroying his macros. His mother noticed when he started smiling at his phone during family dinners. Sometimes Marcus came to the bookstore in the morning before his first training session, still energized from his workout, and Owen would make him tea and listen as Marcus talked about the mind-muscle connection or the meditative quality of repetitive motion. Sometimes he came late in the afternoon, when the light slanted golden through the windows, and they'd sit in the back corner on two mismatched armchairs and discuss whatever Marcus was reading. Owen would recommend books, starting with poetry, then moving to short stories, then novels, and Marcus would actually read them, slowly working his way through a world he'd never known existed. In exchange, Marcus started telling Owen about bodybuilding, not the Instagram highlight reel of perfect poses and competition wins, but the real thing. The discipline it required, the mental game, the way you had to learn to listen to your body, like it was speaking a language only you could understand. The vulnerability of standing on stage in nothing but small trunks while judges evaluated every inch of you. The dedication of eating the same meals day after day, of training even when you didn't feel like it, of pushing through plateaus and setbacks, and the voice in your head that said you weren't good enough. "It's meditation," Owen said one day, about a month into their friendship. They were sitting in the back corner of the shop, in the comfortable armchairs that were becoming their designated spots. Rain pattered against the window again. It had been a wet autumn. "What you do? It's moving meditation." "I never thought of it that way," Marcus said, cradling his mug of tea. Owen had learned that Marcus liked his tea strong and sweet, and always prepared it that way without asking. "But yeah, I guess it is. When I'm lifting, everything else disappears. It's just me and the weight. No anxiety, no overthinking, no past or future. Just that moment." "That's how I feel about reading," Owen confessed. "The world goes quiet, and it's just me and the story. Everything else falls away." Marcus studied him in the lamplight, taking in the way shadows played across his face, the comfortable slope of his shoulders, the ink stain on his right index finger from a leaky pen. Over the past weeks, he'd learned so much about Owen. That he'd inherited the bookstore from his uncle 5 years ago. That he'd been an English literature professor at a small college before that, teaching undergraduates about romantic poetry and Victorian novels. That he'd left academia because he loved books more than he loved publishing papers about books, loved readers more than he loved faculty meetings and departmental politics. He'd learned that Owen was kind to everyone, that he extended credit to customers who were short on cash, that he kept a box of books by the door marked free for anyone who needed them. He'd learned that Owen's favorite food was Thai curry, extra spicy, and that he always ordered the same thing, Panang curry with tofu. That he was allergic to cats, but loved dogs, especially the big goofy ones. That he had a younger sister in Portland named Emma, whom he called every Sunday without fail, and that she was a social worker who made him proud but also worried him constantly. He'd also learned that Owen had been single for 3 years, since a bad breakup with a fellow professor, someone who'd wanted Owen to be more ambitious, more political, more interested in climbing academic ladders than reading on quiet afternoons. And that information had pleased Marcus more than it probably should have, had made something hopeful bloom in his chest like spring flowers. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said, the words coming out before he could overthink them, before the cautious part of his brain could stop him. "Anything," Owen replied, looking at him with those warm brown eyes. "Would you want to get dinner sometime? Not here, not talking about books, just dinner, with me." The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but felt like an hour. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs, harder than it ever did before a competition, harder than when he was attempting a personal record on deadlifts. Owen's expression cycled through surprise, confusion, then something that looked like hope and joy mixed together. "Like a date?" he asked quietly, carefully, like the words were fragile things that might break. Marcus's mouth was dry. "Yeah, like a date, if you want. If you're interested in guys. In me, I mean, I would really like that, Owen interrupted, saving Marcus from his awkward rambling. I would really like that. They went to a small Italian restaurant in Owen's neighborhood the following Friday, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles and framed photos of Italy covering every wall. The hostess seated them at a corner table, intimate and slightly private, and Marcus felt nervous in a way he never did before competitions. This mattered more somehow. This felt more vulnerable than standing on stage in posing trunks. Marcus ordered chicken piccata, no pasta, steamed vegetables instead. Owen noticed immediately. You don't have to do that, he said gently. Order differently because you're with me. I know you have your diet, your routine. I want to, Marcus said, meeting his eyes across the candlelight. Tonight, I just want to be a guy having dinner with someone he really likes. The macros can wait. The routine can wait. This matters more. Something shifted in Owen's expression, a softening that made him look even more beautiful in the flickering light. Someone you really like? Yeah, Marcus said, reaching across the table to take Owen's hand, feeling brave. Someone I really like. Someone I think about all the time. Someone who makes me want to read poetry and drink tea and believe in things I didn't think were real. What things? Owen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Love at first sight, maybe, Marcus admitted. Or at least love at first conversation. The conversation flowed as easily as it did in the bookstore, but with a new undercurrent of possibility, of hope, of two people discovering that the connection they felt was mutual and real, and maybe the beginning of something important. They talked about their childhoods, Marcus growing up in a large Puerto Rican family in the Bronx, the youngest of 4 siblings, always the biggest kid in class, finding his identity in the gym when he felt lost everywhere else. Owen raised by his uncle after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12, learning to find families in books when real life felt too painful. Building a world of stories because the real world had proven itself capable of terrible things. They talked about their fears and dreams, their regrets and hopes. Marcus confessed that he worried bodybuilding was all he'd ever be, that without it he didn't know who he was. Owen admitted that he sometimes felt like he was living his uncle's life instead of his own, maintaining a legacy instead of creating something new. They talked until the restaurant started cleaning up around them, until they were the last customers left, until the waiter brought the check with a knowing smile. They argued over the check in the way of people who both want to be generous, finally agreeing to split it. Outside the restaurant, they stood on the sidewalk in that awkward space between the end of a first date and whatever comes next. The street was quiet, just the distant sound of traffic and the rustle of autumn leaves. I had a really great time, Owen said, tucking his hands in his pockets. Me too, Marcus replied. He reached out, slowly enough that Owen could pull away if he wanted, and took his hand, pulling it from his pocket. It was the first time they'd touched beyond accidental brushes of fingers when exchanging books, and the contact sent electricity up Marcus's arm. Owen's hand was smaller than his, the fingers slender and ink-stained from a day of working with books. It fit perfectly. Can I kiss you? Marcus asked. Please, Owen breathed. Marcus leaned down. Owen was a good 6 inches shorter and pressed his lips to Owen's in a kiss that was gentle and questioning. Owen made a small sound in the back of his throat and kissed back, his free hand coming up to rest against Marcus's chest, probably feeling the rapid hammering of his heart. They broke apart after a moment, both smiling like fools, both breathing a little faster. Wow, Owen said. Yeah, Marcus agreed. Wow. They started dating properly after that, and Marcus discovered that being in a relationship was nothing like he'd expected. He'd dated before, casually, both women and men. But he'd never felt this before, this desire to rearrange his entire, carefully structured life to make room for another person. He started doing his evening workouts earlier so he could have dinner with Owen. He brought Owen protein smoothies at the bookstore, carefully crafted to include ingredients Owen actually liked, berries and vanilla and just enough protein powder to be beneficial without being overwhelming. He learned to brew tea properly and kept Owen's favorite kind in his apartment, a fancy loose-leaf jasmine variety that came from a specialty shop 3 neighborhoods over. Owen, in turn, came to watch Marcus train. The first time he showed up at the gym, Marcus felt absurdly nervous. This was his domain, the place where he was most himself, and having Owen there felt vulnerable in a way he couldn't quite explain. The gym was loud and aggressive, all clanging weights and grunting men and mirrors covering every surface. It was the opposite of the quiet, gentle world of the bookstore. But Owen had sat on a bench, reading a book, but looking up often to watch, and afterward he'd said, "You're magnificent. The way you move, the focus you have, it's like watching a dancer. There's grace in it, artistry." I never understood that before. No one had ever called Marcus magnificent before. Huge, sure. Intimidating often. Impressive sometimes. But magnificent? That was a word for sunsets and symphonies. Not for a guy lifting heavy things and putting them down again. "You see me differently than most people do," Marcus said later, as they walked back to his apartment through the cooling evening. "I see you," Owen corrected. "Not your body, not your achievements, not the image you present. I see the person who gets excited about metaphors in poetry, who calls his mother every day, who treats everyone at the gym with respect, regardless of their fitness level. I see the real you, and I like him. I more than like him." They made love for the first time that night, and it was nothing like the rushed athletic encounters Marcus had experienced before. Owen touched him like he was something precious, kissed every scar and stretch mark, whispered words against his skin that sounded like poetry. Marcus, in turn, was careful with his strength, gentle in a way he'd never been before, attentive to every sound and movement. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Marcus's bed, skin against skin, hearts beating in sync, and Marcus felt something slot into place in his chest, like a piece of a puzzle he hadn't known was missing. "I'm falling in love with you," he said into the darkness. The words scary and wonderful at the same time. Owen's hand found his and squeezed. "I already fell," he whispered back. "That first day, I think, when you sat down soaking wet and asked me to tell you about my book. I fell right then. The next few months were the happiest of Marcus's life. He and Owen fell into a routine that felt both exciting and comfortable, that perfect balance of novelty and security. Marcus would stop by the bookstore most mornings, bringing coffee for both of them from the cafe down the street. They'd have lunch together several times a week, sometimes at the little Thai place Owen loved, sometimes at the meal prep restaurant Marcus favored, both of them learning to navigate the other's world. Most evenings were spent at one apartment or the other, cooking dinner or ordering in, reading side by side on the couch or talking for hours, or making love with increasing familiarity and deepening emotion. Owen came to Marcus's competitions, cheering louder than anyone else in the audience, and Marcus could always find him in the crowd, could always feel the support radiating from that one spot. Owen didn't understand all the technical aspects, couldn't tell a lat spread from a front double bicep, but he understood dedication and artistry, and he saw Marcus's posing as a performance, a presentation of months of work in a few crucial minutes. Marcus helped Owen organize a local book fair, using his social media following to promote it, and then his muscles to help set up tables and carry boxes of books. He convinced several of his fitness influencer friends to attend and post about it, bringing a whole new demographic into Owen's world. The fair was a massive success, and watching Owen's joy as he talked to customers and recommended books and connected readers with stories made Marcus fall even more deeply in love. They met each other's friends and families. Owen's sister Emma flew in from Portland for a weekend and pulled Marcus aside on the second day to say, with tears in her eyes, "I haven't seen my brother this happy in years, maybe ever. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Thank you for loving him." Marcus's mother invited Owen to Sunday dinner, and the fact that she was inviting Marcus's boyfriend That she used that word without hesitation made Marcus's throat tight with gratitude. She immediately adopted Owen, making sure he had seconds of everything, asking about his preferences, sending him home with enough leftovers to feed him for a week. Marcus's siblings teased them both mercilessly and with great affection, and his father, usually reserved, shook Owen's hand and said, "You make my son smile." That's all I need to know, but it wasn't all easy. They had their first real fight about 4 months in, and it was about something Marcus had known was coming, but dreaded nonetheless. "I don't understand why you won't do it," Owen said, his voice tight with frustration. They were in Owen's apartment. What should have been a quiet Sunday evening turned tense and uncomfortable. "It's just a photo. With me, for my birthday. One photo acknowledging that I exist in your life. I post photos all the time," Marcus said, defensive, feeling cornered. "I posted one yesterday, and 3 times last week. Of your back muscles," Owen shot back, his voice rising. "Of your meal prep. Of your gym. I'm talking about posting a photo of us together. As a couple. You've had me to dinner with your family. I've met all your friends. We've been dating for 4 months. But your Instagram followers, 200,000 of them, have no idea I exist. You've carefully edited me out of your public life." Marcus felt trapped, a familiar panic rising in his chest, making it hard to breathe. "My Instagram is for fitness content. It's professional. It's my brand. Other fitness influencers post about their relationships," Owen said, his voice dropping to something quieter and more painful than anger. "I've seen them. I've looked. Plenty of them share their personal lives, introduce their partners, post about date nights and anniversaries. So what's the real reason, Marcus? Why are you hiding me?" And there it was, the truth he'd been avoiding, the fear he'd been pushing down every time he thought about going public. Marcus sank onto the couch, his head in his hands, feeling the weight of it all. "My followers expect a certain image," he said finally, the words dragged out of him. Big, strong, masculine. The ideal male physique. I'm supposed to be inspirational, aspirational. I'm afraid if they know I'm dating a guy, especially a guy like you, no offense. A guy like me. Owen's voice was sharp now, hurt, bleeding through the anger. "What does that mean exactly?" "You know what I mean," Marcus said miserably, unable to look at him. "You're not what they'd expect. You're intellectual and gentle, and you wear cardigans and read poetry. You're the opposite of the gym bro aesthetic. You don't fit the image I've spent years building." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush him, thick enough to suffocate in. "So you're ashamed of me," Owen said flatly. And Marcus had never heard his voice sound like that before, so empty and hurt. "No!" Marcus looked up, desperate. "God, no. Owen, you're the best thing in my life. You're the only thing that makes me feel like I'm more than just a body, more than just someone who lifts weights. But these sponsors, these followers, they're my livelihood. This is how I pay rent, how I support myself. What if they turn on me? What if I lose everything I've worked for? What if the sponsors drop me and the followers leave, and I'm left with nothing?" Owen stood very still, his arms wrapped around himself like he was holding something in, keeping himself from falling apart. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm, and Marcus heard the finality in it. "My parents died when I was 12 years old. Car accident. Black ice on a bridge. One minute they existed, the next they didn't. My uncle took me in, and one of the first things he told me was that life is too short and too uncertain to spend it hiding who you are. He was gay, and back in his day, back in the 70s and 80s, that meant losing jobs, losing family, sometimes getting beaten up or worse. But he lived out loud anyway. He loved his partner for 43 years, and when I inherited this bookstore, I inherited that lesson too." He looked at Marcus with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears, and Marcus wanted to go to him, to hold him, but something in Owen's posture stopped him. "I won't hide again, not for anyone. I've done that before, pretended to be less than I am, made myself smaller to fit someone else's expectations, and it nearly destroyed me. So you need to decide, Marcus. What matters more? What strangers on the internet think, or what we have? Because I love you. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. But I won't be your secret. I won't be the thing you're ashamed of. That's not fair," Marcus said, his own voice breaking. You're asking me to risk everything. I'm asking you to be brave, Owen replied. I'm asking you to trust that the people who really matter will stay, and the ones who leave weren't worth having anyway. But I understand if that's too much to ask. I understand if your career is more important than us. I just need to know now before I fall any deeper, before this hurts even more than it already does. He walked into his bedroom and quietly closed the door. And the soft click of that door closing was one of the most painful sounds Marcus had ever heard. Marcus left shortly after and spent the next 3 days in agony. He trained obsessively, pushing himself harder than he had in years. But the physical pain couldn't touch the ache in his chest. He stared at his Instagram feed. All those carefully curated photos, all those comments from strangers telling him he was goals, he was inspiring. He was perfect. He'd built this following over years, had turned it into a career that supported him comfortably, had created an identity that felt solid and real. But when he closed the app and looked at his phone's home screen, the wallpaper was a photo of Owen, laughing at something Marcus had said. His eyes crinkled with joy and love, his whole face radiant with happiness. Marcus had taken it without Owen noticing, had set it as his wallpaper because he wanted to see that joy every time he picked up his phone. He thought about his mother, who'd hugged Owen and called him Mijo, who'd pulled Marcus aside after that first Sunday dinner and said, "That one's special. Don't let him go." He thought about Owen's hand in his at the restaurant, the way it fit perfectly despite the size difference. He thought about the way reading poetry had opened up parts of himself he hadn't known existed, had given him language for emotions he'd never been able to articulate. He thought about who he was when he was alone, and who he was when he was with Owen, and realized he liked the second version better. Then he thought about his Uncle Thomas, his father's younger brother. Marcus had been too young to understand when it happened, maybe 6 or 7, but he remembered Uncle Thomas being at family gatherings, remembered his laugh and the way he always snuck Marcus extra dessert. Then one Christmas, Uncle Thomas brought someone, Marcus couldn't remember his name anymore, and introduced him as his partner. The family had been polite during dinner, but afterward, Marcus's father had told Thomas he wasn't welcome anymore. Not if he was going to flaunt that lifestyle around the children. Marcus remembered Uncle Thomas's sad eyes at that last Christmas, remembered how he'd hugged Marcus extra tight and said, "Be brave, mijo. Always be brave." Thomas had died a few years later, alone, and only as an adult had Marcus understood the tragedy of it. His father had refused to attend the funeral, had forbidden the family from going. Marcus's mother had gone anyway, taking Marcus with her, and he remembered the small service, the handful of mourners. The man who'd sobbed at the graveside, Thomas's partner, who'd loved him for 15 years and been excluded from the family. After the service, his mother had said, "Never let fear keep you from love." That's the only thing I regret, that I didn't fight harder for Thomas, didn't insist the family accept him. Don't make my mistakes, Marcus. Was he really going to do the same thing? Choose fear over love? Choose the approval of strangers over the man who made him want to be better? On the 4th day, Marcus sat down and wrote a post. He wrote it, deleted it, and wrote it again. He wrote it a dozen different ways, trying to find the right words, the right tone. Finally, when it felt as true as he could make it, when it felt like something he could be proud of saying, he selected a photo, one someone had taken of him and Owen at the book fair. Marcus's arm around Owen's shoulders, both of them grinning at each other instead of at the camera. Love so obvious in their expressions that it made Marcus's heart hurt to see it, and he hit post. The caption read, "I want to introduce you to someone. This is Owen. He owns a bookstore, he makes the world's best tea, he's teaching me about poetry, and he's the love of my life. For the past few months, I've kept this part of my life private because I was afraid. Afraid of judgment, afraid of losing followers, afraid of not fitting the image you all expect. But I've realized something important. The strength I'm proudest of isn't in my muscles, it's in living authentically. This is me, this is my life, this is my love. If that's not something you can support, I understand, but I won't hide anymore. To everyone who sticks around, thank you. And to Owen, if you're reading this, I'm sorry I made you wait. I love you. You're worth more than 1 million followers could ever be. He posted it before he could lose his nerve, then immediately turned off his phone and drove to the bookstore. Owen was with a customer when Marcus arrived, explaining the differences between various translations of a French novel, and he waited, his heart pounding, until they left. Owen looked at him warily, his expression guarded in a way it had never been before, and that guardedness hurt worse than any physical pain. I posted a photo of us, Marcus said without preamble, the words tumbling out. On Instagram. I told everyone about you, about us. I don't know what's going to happen, and honestly, I'm terrified. I'm terrified I'll lose sponsors and followers and maybe my whole career. But I'm more terrified of losing you. You were right. Life's too short to hide who we are. And who I am is a man who loves you completely and publicly and forever if you'll let me. Owen's hand came up to cover his mouth, his eyes wide behind his glasses. You did that. Check your phone, Marcus said, his voice shaking. With trembling hands, Owen pulled out his phone and navigated to Instagram. Marcus watched his face as he read, saw the tears start to fall, saw the smile break through like sun after rain, saw every emotion play across his features. Shock, joy, love, relief. You idiot, Owen said, laughing and crying at the same time. You beautiful, brave idiot, is that a yes? Marcus asked. To the forever thing. Instead of answering, Owen crossed the distance between them and kissed him, right there in the middle of the bookstore. And Marcus lifted him up and spun him around, both of them laughing now, both of them crying a little. When they finally broke apart, Owen kept his arms around Marcus's neck, his feet still off the ground. I love you, he said fiercely. And yes, forever yes, always yes. Marcus's phone stayed off for the rest of the day. They closed the bookstore early, something Owen said he'd never done before, and went back to Owen's apartment, where they celebrated their new beginning in the best way possible. It was only that evening, curled up together on Owen's couch, that Marcus finally turned his phone back on. The notifications were overwhelming. Hundreds of comments, thousands of likes, his follower count actually up instead of down. He scrolled through the comments with Owen, reading over his shoulder, both of them amazed. Sure, there were some negative ones, some people who unfollowed or left cruel remarks. But the vast majority were positive, supportive, even enthusiastic. You've inspired me to come out to my parents, one comment read. Thank you for being brave, said another. You two are adorable together, read a third. This is the representation we need in the fitness community. Several of his sponsors had commented with supportive messages and rainbow emojis. His follower count continued to climb as they watched, gaining thousands of new followers who appreciated his authenticity. Looks like the world is more ready for authenticity than you thought. Owen murmured against his shoulder. Looks like it, Marcus agreed, his throat tight with emotion. I should have done this months ago. I'm sorry I waited. I'm sorry I hurt you. You did it, Owen said simply. That's what matters. You chose us. You chose love. That's everything. The following months brought changes Marcus couldn't have anticipated. His Instagram engagement actually increased, and he started getting messages from LGBTQ youth thanking him for representation in the fitness world, telling him their stories, asking for advice. He started using his platform differently, not just posting workout tips and meal prep photos, but also talking about mental health, about the pressure of social media, about the importance of living authentically. He partnered with organizations promoting health and wellness in queer communities, using his knowledge to help people who'd often felt excluded from fitness spaces. One of his sponsors actually expanded their contract, wanting him to be the face of their new inclusive marketing campaign. Others followed suit, and Marcus discovered that authenticity was actually good for business, that people connected more deeply with the real him than they ever had with the carefully curated version. But more than any professional success, what mattered was the life he built with Owen. They moved in together after a year, finding an apartment with enough space for Owen's ever-expanding book collection and Marcus's home gym equipment. The blending of their two worlds created something beautiful, bookshelves next to weight racks. The smell of tea mixing with protein powder, poetry books on the kitchen counter next to meal prep containers. They got a dog, a rescued greyhound, that Owen named Bronte, after his favorite author. Marcus pretended to be skeptical about having a pet, about the disruption to his routine, but Bronte slept on Marcus's side of the bed more often than not. And Marcus was the one who took her for morning runs, who bought her expensive organic treats, who baby-talked to her when he thought Owen wasn't listening. Marcus started reading regularly, his nightstand always stacked with Owen's recommendations, and he discovered favorites he never would have found on his own. Owen started working out, never to Marcus's level, but enough that he felt stronger and more confident, and Marcus loved being his trainer, loved seeing Owen discover what his body could do. They influenced each other in countless small ways, their differences not dividing them, but making them both more whole, more complete. 2 years to the day after Marcus first walked into the bookstore, he did it again. He'd planned it carefully, enlisting Emma's help, coordinating with Owen's part-time employee to make sure Owen would be alone. Owen was behind the counter, just like that first time, absorbed in a book. But this time, when he looked up and saw Marcus, it was with the comfortable joy of coming home, of seeing the person you love most in the world. "Hey, you," Owen said, smiling in that way that still made Marcus's heart skip. "What brings you by?" "I thought you had a training session with that new client." "I did. Finished early." Marcus approached the counter, his hand in his pocket, fingers wrapped around a small velvet box. His heart was pounding, but this was good nervousness, excited nervousness. "I wanted to ask you something." "Oh?" Owen set down his book, Middlemarch again. Marcus noticed with a smile, giving Marcus his full attention. Marcus had rehearsed this, had planned the perfect words, something poetic that Owen would appreciate. He'd even memorized a Neruda poem that seemed appropriate. But standing there, looking at the man who'd changed his entire world, all the planned words disappeared like morning fog. "I used to think strength was about how much weight I could lift," he said instead, letting his heart speak. "About how much muscle I could build, how perfectly I could pose, how many competitions I could win. But you taught me it's about how much love you can carry. You taught me about poetry and patience and living authentically. You made me better just by being yourself, just by seeing me, really seeing me, and loving what you found. So I guess my question is..." He pulled out the box and opened it, revealing 2 simple silver bands, each engraved with a line from that first Neruda poem. "Will you marry me?" Owen's hands flew to his mouth, his eyes flooding with tears. "Yes," he managed, his voice breaking. "Yes, of course, yes. 1,000 times yes." Marcus slipped the ring on Owen's finger with shaking hands, and Owen did the same for him, both of them laughing and crying. They kissed across the counter, both of them grinning too much for it to be a proper kiss. Both of them happier than they'd ever been. "I can't believe you proposed in the bookstore," Owen said, wiping his eyes with his cardigan sleeve. "It's where we met," Marcus said. "Where my whole life changed. Where I found you. Seemed right?" "It's perfect," Owen agreed. "You're perfect. We're perfect," Marcus corrected, pulling him in for another kiss. They married 6 months later in a ceremony held in Owen's bookstore, surrounded by friends and family, and literally thousands of books. Marcus wore a tailored suit that Owen had helped him pick out, charcoal grey, with a deep purple tie. Owen wore a vintage tuxedo that had belonged to his uncle, altered to fit his slighter frame. And when Marcus saw him walking down the aisle between the bookshelves, he started crying and didn't stop until they'd said their vows. They wrote their own vows. And when Marcus recited the entire Neruda poem he'd memorized, "I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees," there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Owen's vows were a passage from Middlemarch about love and partnership, about 2 people making each other better, and Marcus had to hold his hands to keep them from shaking. His Instagram post about the wedding went viral, shared thousands of times, featured in news articles and on morning shows. Marcus used the attention to launch a foundation supporting LGBTQ youth in sports and fitness, providing gym memberships and personal training and safe spaces for queer kids who'd felt excluded from athletics. Owen expanded the bookstore to include a community center space, hosting reading groups and writing workshops and safe space meetings for queer youth. The two of them building something bigger than themselves. Years later, when people asked Marcus about his greatest achievement, he never mentioned his championships or his social media following or even his foundation, though he was proud of all of it. He talked about a rainy Tuesday when he took shelter in a bookstore and found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. He talked about learning that strength comes in many forms and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be loved. He talked about Owen, always Owen, the gentle bookstore owner who taught a bodybuilder about poetry and changed his entire world. And Owen, when asked about his favorite love story, would smile and say it wasn't in any of the thousands of books lining his shelves, though he loved them all. The best love story he knew was the one he lived every day, with a man who'd learned to love poetry and a life they'd built together, one day, one page, one kiss at a time, because sometimes love finds us in the most unexpected places, between the most unlikely people. And when it does, when we're brave enough to embrace it despite our fears, it transforms us into the people we were always meant to be. Not despite our differences, but because of them. Not in spite of who we are, but because of it. Together, always together, building a life that was more beautiful than either of them could have created alone.